right, welcome back to class, everybody. Here is my Hitler and Notable Nazis lecture, bonus lecture that I'm doing for class, where, we'd already talked about that this is an American history class. So, like, within the scope of the curriculum that I will cover for, like, required lectures, most of it we're looking at things from the American vantage point. However, I think guys like Winston Churchill, who I had previously covered, or Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, or maybe in the future, like Joseph Stalin, the communist leader of the Soviet Union. They're all very interesting people that are quite notable. And also, a lot of kids really get into learning about these guys, some of the good guys and the bad guys from history. Some of these bad boys are generally quite high interest, and they're very much worth covering. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to do one of these extra credit or bonus lectures. So if you need extra credit points, hey, take advantage of this. Even if you don't need extra credit points, but you're just kind of a good student of history that's tuned into this and finds the Nazis, the Holocaust, stuff like that interesting, well, hey, this lecture would be for you too. So if you want to do the sum up and get bonus points, follow my instructions for that. I also attach that to this post. If you don't need any extra credit, hey, and you're interested in this subject, watch along and hopefully you find it engaging and enjoyable. All right. Hitler and the Notable Nazis. Now, Hitler had an inner circle of about 10 guys that kind of helped him pull off the whole war effort during World War II and the Holocaust. I'm going to cover 3 of them in this video, probably the 3 biggest names within his inner circle. And for this one, I know we've already talked about these guys a little bit, and obviously they don't like Jews. Obviously, they want to establish the Third Reich, which means like the Third German Empire. And they're getting into the war. I'm going to try not to repeat things that I've already covered previously in class. This will be more bonus material. So hopefully everybody that tunes in and watches it finds it valuable. All right. So Hitler, is he the ultimate bad guy from history? I don't know. That's kind of an interesting question because here's the thing. I think he's definitely up in the mix of ultimate bad boys from history. I'm not sure that he is the biggest one, though. That's a very subjective thing. If you look at just terms of like body count and how many people died, well, he's probably the number 1 ranking guy there in terms of like historical monsters or madmen out there. However, I don't know that it makes him the worst and most evil one, because for a couple reasons. First, we always look at somebody differently if it's still like the atrocities and crimes they committed or within living memory. What I mean by that is there are still Holocaust survivors that are alive today and going around and giving speeches and talking about their experiences. Now, most of that generation has died off at this point. If you are a Holocaust survivor and you're going around and giving speeches today, you're probably very old. And at the time the Holocaust happened, you were a young child. So within your lifetime, that whole generation will just die out of natural causes. But that impacts how we look at things, because you can actually see somebody and go talk to them, shake their hand, listen to them, learn from them, and hear about the horrible things they did. Now, Genghis Khan is a awful rotten dude from world history too, who lived back in the year like 1200, and he went on a rampage around Asia and Europe and killed per capita wise, percentage wise, in terms of the population, every bit as many, if not more people than Hitler killed. But we look at him a little bit different because it's ancient history. None of his victims, or even the grandkids or great 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 grandkids of his victims, are still alive today, because it happened 800 plus years ago. So that does change things. It'll be interesting to see down the road a little bit, when you guys are parents or grandparents, if the narrative and the coverage of Hitler changes at all. So be mindful of that and watch it as it plays out, because every generation kind of evaluates history over again. So it'll be interesting to see how the coverage of Hitler and the Nazis might get tweaked or shifted over time. Now, for background from him, I had already kind of covered in the intro to World War II lecture that Hitler wasn't even German. He actually was born in Austria, which is another German-speaking country. But during World War II, he leaves Austria because their army was super backwards and inept and very incompetent. And he goes and joins in the German army, applies and gets a German citizenship. Remember, he was a very brave soldier from all the accounts I've ever read, almost gets killed multiple times. He Yeah, did his part for sure during the war. Now, he also, and I think this is kind of a crucial little component or part detail about him. He always, through his whole life, was seen as kind of an outcast, or just socially awkward. He didn't fit in with everybody else. He had a hard time finding his place, and maybe that's explains a lot in terms of like how he developed as an adult, and once he got power, how he used that power. He has kind of a sad backstory. Like if you rewind back to before World War One, he was born in Austria to a pretty humble, modest family. I guess he had a super strict father. I would guess, and this is speculation, but I've seen other historians kind of talk about this, that anti-Semitism or hating the Jews, thinking the Jews were up to no good, was fairly common all over Europe at this time. And there is some evidence that suggests that Hitler's parents bought into that. So that probably planted that seed of anti-Semitism in him when he was a very young kid. His father was super strict and would punish him quite a bit. I guess he had a tense relationship and kind of locked horns with his father quite a bit. Now, his dad wanted him to take a civil service job. He wanted him to be a tax collector, a postmaster, a teacher, I don't know, some job, like government job that would be reliable and steady, and you be a family man and carry on the family name. Hitler had very little interest in that. He was pretty attached to his mother. Now, Hitler's father dies at a fairly young age. That affects him. Once he's a little older, like by the time of World War One era, I believe his mother has passed away too. So he loses both of his parents when he's still a pretty young man. Another little interesting random historical tidbit for you. He actually, and I don't remember the whole story for this, but it was a very good chance that actually, because of like how the marriage and the family dynamic played out, Hitler was almost not his last name. That his name could have been Schlickelgruber or something very similar to that. Sorry, my German pronunciation isn't that good. But maybe that would have changed history too. Could you imagine, crowds, legions of people saying Heil Schlickelgruber? I don't know. I think Hitler has a different ring to it. So who knows if that impacted history or not. But eventually, and I forget the exact story of how that happened, but through a kind of change in the family, he does end up with the last name Hitler, on his birth certificate. Now, moving on, what was he passionate about as a young man? He actually, well, he was passionate about Germany. He was very much a nationalist and believed Germany was the best country out there. He very much bought into all that. Even though he didn't take a lot of pride in Austria, he from a young age believes in the Anschluss, which is something he tries to put into practice when he becomes the leader guy. But having a one country where all of the German speaking peoples of Europe would be unified together, that's something he's passionate about and makes him tick. But what does he want to do with his life? It actually wasn't to be a soldier. He wanted to be an artist. If you look at some photographs of his art from this period of his life, he's, I don't know, from my standards, he looks pretty darn good. He was a better drawer and painter than I am. But I guess when you compare him to other like legit artists that are making a living at that, he wasn't that good. And when he tries to get into the art school at Vienna, Vienna is the capital, it's a massive city in Austria, he kind of gets laughed out of town and they tell him, you're just not good enough. That puts a chip on his shoulder. That makes him a little bit angry and bitter because this is something like, how would history have been different if Hitler had been a good artist and gotten accepted at Vienna? Well, I'm guessing none of us would have ever heard his name. He would have probably just been some, mild-mannered kind of low-level artist, and he may have had, went and talked about conspiracy theories and hated the Jews, but almost certainly he would have never rose to be a leader and done the things that he did. But getting rejected from art school, that makes him kind of angry and bitter. And even like a lot of things in his life, he spins it around and kind of finds a way to blame it on the Jews, that the Jews are corrupt and they were running the art school. Anyway, next thing about him, like he after World War One, he's super bitter about that loss. He looks at it and he says, I don't know if you remember this, but Germany never officially lost on the battlefield in World War One. They got pushed back. They were gonna lose for sure. But the Allied armies never get into Germany. When the fighting stops and Germany says, all right, we're gonna call an armistice and let's start talking about peace terms here. The trenches are still in France and in Belgium. Now the end was getting close, but like They never officially lost. Now, Hitler, he looks at that and says, like many other Germans do, and they start spinning conspiracy theories and say, you know what? These brave German soldiers sacrificed everything out at the front, and then we were stabbed in the back by Jews and communists and, scandalous politicians back on the home front who sold us out, and then that makes our sacrifice meaningless. He ends up, he works for the government for a while after that, but he truly believes that Germany got cheated out of World War One. He actually is. The German government hires him as kind of like a police agent, and they ask him to go spy on the Nazi Party, which he didn't create the Nazi Party; it had already existed. But when he goes and spies on them and is working for the German government, he hears what they're saying, and kind of the message is basically the heart and soul, the core of the Nazi message, and he relates to it, and he stops working for the German government, and he starts going to Nazi Party meetings, and very quickly he starts giving fiery speeches in the beer hall, in the bar where these guys would meet, and the other Nazi officials kind of at the time, which this is a very small party, it's like, I'm talking like 50 guys or something down in southern Germany that would meet at a beer hall, and they would complain about life and Jews and whatever else, but they realize early on that, man, this guy really has a knack for speaking. They start working with them very quickly. He rises to a leadership position and kind of takes control of this fledgling Nazi party. He practices public speaking. If you ever go watch a video of him on YouTube giving a speech, now there'll be a language barrier. You won't quite understand probably anything that he's saying, but just watch his hand gestures. Watch while the crowd reacts to him. He practiced for hours and hours at this point in his life, giving these hand gestures and pounding the podium and just intense public speeches that would really, I guess he was good at whipping a crowd into a frenzy and getting them to buy in. He was a powerful and just potent public speaker. So that's one of his traits that he definitely develops over time and uses to his advantage. Now, conspiracy theories, paranoia, drug use. Okay. People debate whether he truly believed in all of the Jewish conspiracies that he spun. Here's the thing: if he didn't believe in it a lot, and if he was only using it as a stepping stone and a way to mobilize the people, there's a lot of things he did that are total head scratchers that don't make sense. For example, in 1942 and 43, the war is in the balance. It could go either way. Germany is in a death struggle out on the Eastern Front with the Russian army. They need every possible man they can get. Every German soldier that they can get out there, they need them out there because the war is teetering and feels like it could go either way at that point. Remember, the Holocaust doesn't start until 1942, this really crucial year of the war. Even in 1942-43, when the war is not going great for Germany, he diverts soldiers from the front to make prison camps like Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. He diverts manpower and resources towards exterminating Jews. Why the heck would you do that if you didn't believe in it? It's kind of like the Jews would still be there at the end of the war. Why don't you worry about winning the war first, getting all of your armies out there, and then you could deal with that problem later, I guess. And that would be if he was making it all up and knew he was making up those conspiracy theories. But if he truly believed in that stuff, which I think he actually did, I think all of the things he said, even though they're not true, and he doesn't have a lot of evidence, really any evidence, for that the Jews, were taking over the world, or that there are these rich Jewish bankers that, have infiltrated all the governments around the world and had sabotaged the German war effort of World War One. I think he actually believed all of that stuff, and his actions make more sense if you look at it from that perspective, that he actually truly believed in it. If you really think that the Jews are this secret cabal that are going to take over the world and going to exterminate and enslave everybody else, well, then it kind of makes more sense to try to exterminate them and to divert, resources to dealing with this problem, because I think, really did think that that was the biggest problem that Germany and the world faced. So it doesn't mean that he's right. He's not right, but I think he believed he was right, if that makes sense. Now, he's an paranoid guy. He always thinks somebody's out to get him. Now, there were multiple assassination attempts. Some interesting stories there. There's a good movie called Valkyrie that if you're into that kind of stuff, that was the one that almost took him out at the end of the war, but he sees enemies around every corner. And that's kind of true within his inner circle, I think, a little bit too. So maybe he had a reason to be paranoid in some circumstances, but it definitely went over the top. And a lot of these dictator guys, Stalin too, Mussolini, they were epically paranoid and always were seeing people out to get them. And I think that's compounded by his drug use. Now, he's kind of interesting in that respect because, it was very common to drink, smoke cigarettes, to party back at this time. We're kind of in the jazz era, right? And that wasn't just America, that's over in Europe too. Um, Hitler, I guess he got drunk one time in his life from the stories I've heard. And it was back when he was an art student. He got blackout drunk. He woke up in a ditch, had a miserable headache and hangover, and he said, screw this. I'm never doing that again. And he's like, oh, that. And he discouraged, even after he comes into power, he really never drinks much. Every now and then he would have like a beer with dinner, but not a big drinker. He never really liked smoking. He always thinks that's disgusting. He discourages drinking in his inner circle, like of political leaders and in amongst his officers. He doesn't ban it, but he thinks it's a bad personality trait. He also discouraged smoking, thought it was a gross habit. He would actually buy a beautiful gold, very expensive watch for any of his officers that gave up cigarettes and quit smoking. So kind of some interesting stuff there. However, he does become highly addicted to stimulants, amphetamines, cocaine. That is what, kind of makes him tick. And his addiction gets way worse as the war goes on and starts turning against Germany. I don't know where he started using amphetamines and cocaine. Probably not in his real early years. It's probably not till he's a leader and World War II is going on. But then as the war goes on, his paranoia increases and then the war starts to turn. He starts to get depressed and get down and has a hard time sleeping. And his personal doctor, actually, at least by the end of the war, is giving him like 2 injections of amphetamines a day that would boost him up. And I guess he was a totally different man from before the meeting or from before the injection to after the injection, where he could barely keep his head up ahead of time, and then boom, and then all of a sudden he's ready to start spitting and screaming and giving speeches. They also, his doctor would come in and give like liquid cocaine eye drops to him and drop those into his eyes, and that would give him a little boost. So there's actually a case that like you could make that the Germans would have had a better chance of winning World War II if, in say 1942 or so, Hitler had been assassinated and somebody else. A lot of his inner circle is kind of incompetent too. But if you had a guy like Rommel take over, that other general I had mentioned, they may have done quite a bit better because Hitler often is undermining different generals and field marshals, and he is like being nitpicky and micromanaging the war effort. And he made a few smart decisions early on that we'd went over, but then by the time the war is really rolling, most of the military and tactical decisions he makes are very big blunders and don't work out. So the Allies, like America and Great Britain, actually had thought about like dropping off a sharpshooter, a sniper behind German lines and trying to kill him and take him out with a long range shot. And they actually decided against that. And the main reason was not that they couldn't do it like logistically or pull that off, but it was that, hey, we think Hitler, the word on the street is he's kind of starting to lose his mind. He's paranoid. He's getting heavily addicted to drugs, and he's making all kinds of mistakes that actually the war will probably go shorter the longer he stays in power because he's making so many big mistakes by the end of the war. All right, this is starting to drag on a little bit, so I am going to release a part 2 in the very near future where I'm going to cover some of the guys in Hitler's inner circle. But hopefully that gave you some interesting info that you haven't heard before about the man himself, Adolf Hitler, who is one of the ultimate bad boys of history. If you have any questions, if there's anything else that you'd want to throw out at me, get my take, or maybe something that you know that's interesting about him that I didn't cover, hit me up. I love talking about this stuff. So shoot me an email, contact me. I'm definitely happy to have a side follow-up conversation with you. And then just a reminder for how you get extra credit for this. You can either send me an email where you sum up everything that I kind of went over. You don't have to write it all out word for word, but you got to convince me that you watched it. Take details that spread out through the whole lecture I gave, and then send me that, and I will give you some points. The other option is, if you don't like doing that, you can either come into school face to face, or you could schedule a phone call with me, and I'll just have a quick, I don't know, 2 to 5 minute or so conversation with you, where I'll talk to you about the lecture, get some feedback, basically feel it out and see, and you're going to convince me again that you watched it. And if you do that, then I'll award you some extra points. So that's what I got for you for today, and I'll be back very soon with part 2, where we're hitting some of Hitler's inner circle.